For 3 years, Mafia boss Enzo Barone barely spoke at Sunday dinner, not since the crash that killed his wife and baby son. Then 3-year-old Lucia climbed into his lap and rested against his chest. Everyone froze. Her terrified mother rushed forward, but Enzo raised one hand. "Let her stay." Lucia looked up and asked, "Why does your heart sound sad?" Before Enzo could answer, a hidden camera flashed outside the window. Minutes later, the photographer vanished, and Matteo found the picture sent to Enzo's deadliest rival with 5 chilling words. "He finally has something to lose." Before we begin, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Now listen closely, because one child was about to do what armed men, loyal relatives, and years of patience had failed to do. At 42, Enzo Barone was one of the most feared mafia bosses in Chicago. His name could empty a room, stop an argument, or make a dishonest man reconsider his answer. Yet every Sunday evening, at the long dining table in the Barone estate, Enzo looked less like a powerful boss and more like a man serving a sentence no court had given him. He sat at the head of the table in a dark suit, his untouched wine beside his right hand, while conversation moved carefully around him. No one asked why he never joined in. Everyone knew. 3 winters earlier, Enzo had survived the car accident that killed his wife, Elena, and their 8-month-old son, Luca. The police had called it a tragedy. Enzo called it the night he should have died with them. His mother, Rosa, kept the Sunday dinners alive because she feared the family would drift apart if she allowed the tradition to end. She sat near Enzo and spoke about ordinary things: a neighbor's new roof, the church fundraiser, a recipe her sister had sent from Naples. Elena's chair had been removed after the funeral, but Rosa never allowed anyone else to sit in the place where it once stood. Enzo's younger brother, Carlo, answered when needed and left long pauses when he saw Enzo's jaw tighten. Matteo Rinaldi, Enzo's consigliere and oldest trusted advisor, usually discussed business before dinner so Enzo would not have to speak at the table. They had all learned the same rule: do not force him. In 3 years, Enzo had never missed the meal, but he rarely used more than 5 words. Sometimes he nodded. Sometimes he lifted 2 fingers to dismiss a question. Most Sundays, he simply listened with an expression that warned everyone not to mistake his presence for peace. That evening seemed no different. But before dessert arrived, a 3-year-old girl would cross the room, and the first person to underestimate her would not be sitting at the table. In the estate kitchen, Bianca Russo was trying to complete the work of 3 people without allowing anyone to notice. At 30, she had learned how to carry worry without dropping a plate. Lucia's father had left before the child was born, taking his promises and leaving unpaid rent, medical bills, and a number that no longer worked. Bianca served breakfast at a neighborhood diner each morning, returned home for 2 hours with her daughter, and then cooked at the Barone estate in the evenings. Sunday was her longest shift. Her babysitter, an elderly neighbor named Mrs. Conti, had woken with a fever that morning and could not take Lucia. Bianca had called everyone she trusted, but no one was free. Finally, the head housekeeper allowed her to bring Lucia through the service entrance and keep her in the staff sitting room. Bianca arranged crayons, apple slices, a cup of milk, and Lucia's worn stuffed rabbit on a low table. Then she crouched beside her daughter and made her promise not to leave until Mama returned. For nearly an hour, Lucia obeyed. She colored a purple house, fed an apple slice to her rabbit, and listened to the sounds coming through the walls. But the sitting room was unfamiliar. The shadows outside its window had grown longer, and Bianca had not returned. Lucia called for her mother once. No one heard over the clatter of pans and serving carts. She waited a little longer, then hugged the rabbit under one arm and opened the door. She followed the smell of roasted chicken through the service corridor, past 2 housemaids carrying folded napkins, and reached a wide doorway filled with warm light. Beyond it stood the grand dining room. Lucia saw Bianca near the sideboard, placing vegetables onto a silver serving dish. She also saw a man sitting alone at the head of a crowded table. Everyone was near him, yet no one leaned toward him. To Lucia, Enzo did not look dangerous. He looked lonely. Bianca turned at that moment and saw her daughter entering the room. The serving spoon slipped in her hand. "Lucia," Bianca whispered, but the warning came too late. The child walked between the chairs with her rabbit dragging by one ear. Carlo stopped speaking halfway through a sentence. Rosa's hand remained above her water glass. Two guards near the wall shifted their weight, waiting for Enzo to signal. Lucia reached his chair and studied him with open curiosity. Enzo looked down at her. The dining room held its breath. Without asking permission, Lucia placed one hand on his knee, climbed onto his lap, tucked her legs against his coat, and rested her head on his chest. Then she began to hum to her stuffed rabbit. Bianca felt the blood leave her face. No servant touched Enzo. Most members of his own family waited for an invitation before approaching his chair. She hurried across the room, already apologizing. "Mr. Barone, please forgive me." She was told to stay in the sitting room. "I will take her now." She reached for Lucia, certain she had just lost both of her jobs. Then Enzo moved. His hand came up, not toward Bianca, but toward the child. He laid his palm across Lucia's back, as if he feared a sudden movement might frighten her. Bianca stopped. Enzo looked at the rabbit, at the dark curls against his shirt, and then at the 3-year-old listening to the beat beneath his ribs. "Let her stay," he said. 4 simple words, spoken in a voice rough from disuse, changed the room. Rosa lowered her eyes because they had filled with tears. Carlo stared at his brother as though he had heard a locked door open upstairs. Even Matteo's guarded expression softened for one brief moment. Lucia lifted her head. "Your heart is loud," she told Enzo. A faint sound almost like laughter moved around the table, but no one dared release it. Lucia pressed her ear to his chest again and added, "It sounds sad." Enzo's fingers tightened gently against her back. For the first time that evening, he looked uncertain, but Lucia was not the only person watching him. Outside the dining room window, beyond the row of trimmed hedges, a man in a white server's jacket stood in the service garden. He had arrived that afternoon with a temporary wine crew hired for the dinner. His papers appeared correct, and during the busiest hour no one had questioned why he carried his phone from room to room. Now he raised it beneath the window and took 3 photographs through the glass. The clearest image showed Lucia resting in Enzo's lap, while Enzo's hand covered her back. The server sent it to an encrypted number, deleted the message from the screen, and slipped through a garden gate used for deliveries. Inside, Enzo remained at the table until Lucia's humming stopped. She had fallen asleep against him. Bianca waited nearby, unsure whether she was allowed to breathe. When dinner ended, Enzo let her lift the child from his arms. He said nothing else, but before Bianca left, he adjusted the rabbit beneath Lucia's elbow so it would not fall. 20 minutes later, Matteo entered Enzo's study carrying a phone sealed inside a clear evidence bag. Security had found it beneath the hedge outside the dining room window. The temporary server was gone. The staffing agency had never employed anyone under the name printed on his identification, and the photograph in its records belonged to a man who had died 2 years earlier. Enzo examined the recovered screen while Carlo ordered every gate closed and every camera recording preserved. A technician restored part of the deleted transmission. The photograph of Lucia had been sent, but the receiving number was hidden behind several false accounts. Only one line of text remained beneath the image. "He finally has something to lose." Enzo's face hardened. Upstairs in the guest room, Lucia slept beside her mother, unaware that strangers now knew her face. Matteo looked toward the locked door, then gave Enzo the warning no one in the room wanted to hear. "By morning, every enemy you have may know about that child." Bianca did not sleep after the photograph was discovered. She spent the night in a guarded guest room with Lucia curled beside her, expecting every footstep in the corridor to bring news that she had been dismissed. At 7 the next morning, Matteo escorted her to Enzo's study. She entered with her hands clasped, ready to apologize again, but Enzo did not allow it. "You brought your daughter because you had no safe place to leave her," he said. "The man outside that window entered under a stolen name. That failure belongs to my security, not to you." He ordered all temporary workers to be checked directly with their agencies, all identification to be matched to a live photograph, and personal phones to remain outside the working areas. Then he surprised Bianca further. If childcare failed again, Lucia could come with her, but she would stay in the protected family sitting room where Rosa or an approved member of staff could watch her. Bianca thanked him, relieved but cautious. She did not know that Lucia had already left something behind in his study. Enzo found it beneath a folder late that afternoon, a drawing made with red, blue, and brown crayons. It showed a very tall man sitting at the end of a crowded table. Everyone else had round smiles. The tall man had a straight line for a mouth, and on his lap sat a child holding a rabbit with ears nearly as long as its body. Enzo studied it, then placed it inside his top desk drawer instead of throwing it away. 2 days later, Mrs. Conti was still unwell, so Bianca brought Lucia back. Rosa kept the child with her until Bianca's kitchen shift ended. Near sunset, Lucia appeared at Enzo's open study door with 2 butter cookies. She broke one unevenly and gave him the larger piece. "You are bigger," she explained. Enzo accepted it. Lucia looked at his face and asked why he never smiled. He could have dismissed her with a nod. Instead he answered, "Sometimes a person forgets how, and then it takes time to remember." Lucia considered this before saying, "Mama says practice helps." Enzo almost proved her right. The visits continued, but never on a fixed schedule. Lucia came only when Bianca needed help, and she spent most of her time with Rosa in the family sitting room. One rainy afternoon, she carried a storybook into Enzo's study and asked him to read it because the rabbit in the picture looked like hers. He opened the book and read a single page. His voice was slow at first, but Lucia listened as if every word mattered. Rosa stopped in the hallway when she heard him. She did not enter or call attention to the moment. She simply stood beyond the half-open door with one hand covering her mouth. That evening, Enzo found her arranging flowers in the breakfast room. Instead of passing without speaking, he asked, "Mama, do you still make Elena's lemon cake?" Rosa looked up carefully and said she did. "Make it Sunday," he told her. It was not much, yet it was the first time in 3 years he had spoken Elena's name to her. If you believe a person should never be judged only by their silence, write "never judge" in the comments. A week later, Enzo called Carlo into the library and closed the door. Until then, most family business had passed through Matteo in short written notes. This time Enzo explained, in his own voice, how he wanted the port accounts reviewed and why 2 old transport agreements needed to be changed. Carlo listened without interrupting, less interested in the contracts than in hearing his brother speak for nearly 20 minutes. When they finished, Enzo asked about Carlo's wife and sons. Carlo's answer caught for a moment before he managed to smile. News of Enzo's change moved through the estate, but Bianca did not welcome every part of it. She heard 2 servants describing Lucia as the child who had fixed the boss. Another worker asked whether Lucia would sit in Enzo's lap again at the next dinner. Bianca went directly to Enzo. "My daughter is not a performance," she said, nervous but firm. "I will not have people calling for her whenever they want to see you react." Enzo did not take offense. "You are her mother," he replied. "You decide when she comes near me." From that day, Enzo never sent anyone to fetch Lucia. If she appeared at his door, it was because she had chosen to walk there, and if Bianca said it was time to leave, Enzo let her go. He also warned the household that no one was to photograph the child, discuss her with visitors, or repeat private moments outside the estate. Bianca noticed the difference. She began to trust that Enzo's interest in Lucia was not a passing amusement. Yet Enzo was beginning to notice Bianca for reasons that had nothing to do with her daughter. The proof came before a dinner for 20 important guests. At noon, the estate's main food supplier reported that a refrigeration failure had destroyed the meat, cream, and fresh produce intended for the evening. The kitchen manager panicked. 2 younger workers feared they would be blamed because they had confirmed the order. Bianca checked the invoices and showed that the delivery company, not the staff, had broken the contract. Then she rolled up her sleeves and rebuilt the entire menu from what the estate already had. She sent one cook to a trusted neighborhood butcher, asked the gardener to gather late tomatoes and herbs from the greenhouse, and replaced the ruined cream dessert with baked pears, honey, and walnuts. She moved the least experienced workers away from the hottest stations, gave each person one clear task, and refused to let the kitchen manager shout at them. By 7, the guests were served roasted chicken with herbs, fresh bread, vegetables, and a meal that appeared planned rather than rescued. No one outside the kitchen knew how close the dinner had come to failure. Enzo did. He had watched part of the recovery from the service doorway without announcing himself. The next morning, he asked to see the staff schedules and kitchen reports from the previous 6 months. Bianca's name appeared everywhere. She had covered missing shifts, trained new workers, settled arguments, corrected supply counts, and helped employees arrange rides home after late nights. She had performed the duties of a supervisor while receiving the pay of an ordinary cook. Enzo copied the records and locked them in his desk. He was not ready to tell Bianca what he intended to do with them. Matteo entered the study that afternoon, with less welcome news. His men had followed the digital path of the photograph through several false accounts. The trail ended with a known associate of Salvatore Vella, a rival boss who had spent 2 years trying to gain control of the Barone port contracts. Matteo placed the report beside Lucia's drawing. "Vella will not care that the child is innocent," he said. "He will care that you touched her as if she mattered. Other families will see the same thing. A soft boss is a dead boss." Enzo looked at the child's uneven picture, then closed the folder. "A man who feels nothing has nothing left worth protecting." Matteo disagreed. He believed affection created a target, and his duty was to say so. But he did not threaten Bianca, blame Lucia, or suggest betraying them. Instead, he asked permission to double the guards around the staff entrance and place a man near Bianca's bus route. Enzo approved both measures. Matteo remained loyal, even when loyalty required telling Enzo something he did not want to hear. That evening, Bianca finished her shift and carried a sleepy Lucia through the service gate. She refused an estate car because the bus stop was well lit and only a short walk from her apartment. Enzo's guard followed at a respectful distance, dressed like an ordinary commuter. Bianca boarded the number 48 bus, found a seat near the middle, and settled Lucia against her shoulder. At the first traffic light, the guard noticed a dark sedan waiting behind the bus. It followed when the bus turned east. It remained behind them at the next light, and again when the driver changed lanes. The guard remembered seeing the same car parked near the service road earlier that afternoon. He photographed the plate and called Matteo, keeping his voice low so Bianca would not hear. The sedan's headlights disappeared for 1 block, then returned as the bus entered a quieter neighborhood. When Bianca's stop came into view, the car moved closer, and the guard understood that the same dark car was following Bianca's bus home. The guard did not wait for Bianca's bus to reach its final stop. He sent the sedan's photograph and plate number to Matteo, then moved into the aisle and sat 2 rows behind Bianca. At the next busy intersection, another Barone car joined the route without using flashing lights or drawing attention. The dark sedan remained behind the bus for half a mile, then turned away when its driver noticed the second vehicle. Bianca reached her apartment safely, but she understood something was wrong when 2 men stayed outside the building until morning. For the first time, Bianca understood that the photograph was not merely an invasion of privacy. Someone had studied the road to her home, the hour Lucia became sleepy, and the places where a working mother had no choice but to go. At 9 the next day, Enzo called her to the estate. He explained that the car's plate had been copied from a vehicle registered to a retired schoolteacher in Milwaukee. "From today, you and Lucia will have protection whenever you leave this property," he said. Bianca refused at once. She did not want armed men following her to the diner, frightening her neighbors, or making Lucia believe danger was normal. Enzo allowed her to finish before answering. "The danger came from my world. Protecting you from it is my responsibility." Bianca looked through the study window toward the garden, where Lucia was feeding crumbs to sparrows under Rosa's watch. She disliked the idea of becoming dependent on Enzo, but pride could not be allowed to place her daughter at risk. She agreed on 3 conditions. The guards would dress as ordinary people, they would not enter Lucia's preschool, and they would never remove the child from Bianca without direct permission. Enzo accepted every condition. 2 guards began rotating between Bianca's apartment, the diner, the estate, and Lucia's preschool route. They used different cars and kept enough distance to avoid alarming anyone. Enzo also arranged a private number Bianca could call at any hour. The new system seemed careful, but the enemy studying them was careful too. Across Chicago, Salvatore Vella sat in a private room above one of his restaurants, with the photograph from Sunday dinner placed before him. He did not see a child resting in a grieving man's lap. He saw a door that had finally opened. Vella had wanted the Barone port contract for 2 years. The agreement controlled access to 3 warehouses, 2 loading yards, and a section of the river docks through which millions of dollars in legal cargo passed each month. Starting a direct war would have been foolish. The other Chicago families depended on those docks, and an open attack on Enzo would unite them against Vella. So Vella chose patience. He would watch, wait, and find something Enzo valued more than the contract. Until Lucia appeared, no such thing seemed to exist. Enzo had buried his wife and son, avoided close friendships, and shown no fear of losing his own life. Now Vella had seen his hand resting protectively on a child's back. He ordered his men not to touch Bianca or Lucia yet. First, they would learn every route, every habit, and every moment when mother and daughter were apart. If the photograph had revealed Enzo's heart, Vella intended to turn that heart into a chain. 4 days later, Bianca took Lucia to a crowded Saturday street market before her evening shift. 2 guards followed in plain clothes, one near the fruit stalls and another across the road. Bianca stopped to buy bread while Lucia sat in her stroller holding her rabbit. A man carrying a crate of oranges stumbled in front of the nearest guard. The crate struck the pavement, fruit rolling beneath tables and between people's feet. As the guard helped an elderly woman avoid falling, a second man approached Lucia's stroller from behind. He bent as if picking up an orange, reached beneath the fabric near the rear wheel, and moved away. Bianca noticed him only when he was already disappearing into the crowd. She called to the guard. Both men were followed, but the market had 6 exits, and within minutes they were gone. Lucia was unharmed. Nothing had been taken from the stroller, and Bianca's purse remained closed. Yet the first man had created that disturbance for a reason. The question was what his partner had done during those few unguarded seconds. Back at the estate, Matteo ordered the stroller examined before it entered the family wing. A security technician removed the seat cushion and found a tracking device hidden beneath the lining. It was smaller than a matchbox and had been fixed in place with black tape. The signal was active. Enzo ordered the device placed inside a delivery truck that was leaving for an empty warehouse, giving whoever watched it a false destination. Digital records showed that its receiver was registered through the same network of accounts used to send Lucia's photograph. The discovery also answered a question that had begun troubling the household. Vella's people did not need a traitor inside the estate. They had followed Bianca's public bus route, watched her diner, and tried to attach their own tracker when closer surveillance became difficult. Matteo and the permanent staff were cleared of suspicion, but the failed attempt proved the threat was growing. Enzo moved Bianca and Lucia into a guarded guest suite until Vella's network could be identified. The suite stood on the 2nd floor near Rosa's rooms. It had 2 bedrooms, a sitting area, and windows facing the inner garden, where no vehicle could approach unseen. Lucia treated the move like an adventure. She arranged her crayons on a polished table, placed her rabbit on a pillow, and explored the corridor with Bianca close behind. At the far end, she found a white door secured with an old brass lock. Faded wooden letters spelling Lucia remained attached above the frame. Enzo came up the stairs as Lucia touched one of them. "Who lives there?" she asked. Bianca began to guide her away, but Enzo stopped beside the door. For several seconds, he looked at the brass keyhole without answering. "No one lives there now," he finally said. Lucia studied his face. "Did someone go away?" Enzo's hand closed around the key in his pocket. Though he did not take it out, he turned and walked toward his study. Lucia watched him leave and whispered to Bianca, "I made his heart sad again." Bianca knelt beside her and explained that old sadness was never a child's fault. While Bianca settled Lucia for the night, Matteo brought new evidence to Enzo. Facial recognition software had matched the false wine server to a man named Anton Greco, a former driver dismissed by Salvatore Vella 18 months earlier. Greco had not truly left Vella's service. Bank records showed regular payments from a restaurant company controlled by Vella's cousin. The copied license plate from the dark sedan had also appeared on a traffic camera near Bianca's diner 3 mornings in a row. Enzo studied the images and ordered Carlo to trace every property connected to Greco. Before Carlo could leave, a guard arrived with an envelope found inside the abandoned sedan. The vehicle had been discovered in a public garage near the river, wiped clean except for the envelope placed openly on the passenger seat. Whoever left it wanted Enzo to receive what was inside. Matteo opened it with gloved hands and removed a recent photograph of Bianca standing outside the diner in her work uniform. The image had been taken that morning. Bianca was alone beside the rear entrance, tying her apron before the diner opened. A handwritten sentence covered the back. "A mother is easier to reach when the child is somewhere else." Enzo read it twice. The tracker had failed, so Vella had chosen a more direct warning. Enzo checked the time. Bianca had left the estate before dawn for her morning shift, accompanied by a guard who remained outside the diner. Lucia was upstairs with Rosa, exactly where Vella expected her to be. Enzo took out his phone and called Bianca. It rang until the call ended. He tried again while Matteo contacted the outside security team. 5 rings passed, then 6. No one answered, and Enzo realized Bianca's phone was ringing somewhere inside the diner, while the woman it belonged to could not be reached. Enzo reached the diner in less than 12 minutes, with Matteo beside him and another car following. The guard outside met them at the rear entrance, confused by the urgency. He had seen Bianca enter at 6 that morning and had watched every door since. No one had taken her out. Enzo pushed through the kitchen and found Bianca at the grill, turning eggs while 3 breakfast orders waited beside her. Her phone was locked in the employee room because the owner did not allow personal devices during working hours. Bianca saw Enzo's face and immediately knew the unanswered calls had frightened him. He showed her the photograph and the threat written across its back. The color left her cheeks, but she did not panic. Enzo told her to remove her apron and return to the estate at once. "You cannot keep working here while Vela's men know this place," he said. Bianca looked toward the dining counter, where the owner was serving 2 elderly customers. She understood the risk, but she also understood what leaving without a word could cost her. Bianca explained that the diner still owed her a week of wages and tips. She needed to give proper notice, finish the orders already accepted, and leave the kitchen in a way that would not force another worker to cover her without warning. Enzo offered to pay the missing wages, her rent, and any other expense the job covered. Bianca shook her head. "I am grateful, but I will not teach Lucia that fear means we must live on someone else's charity." Enzo could have ordered her into the car. Instead, he respected the same independence that had made her protect younger workers at his estate. They reached a compromise. The owner accepted Bianca's resignation and agreed that the current shift would be her last. 2 trained guards would remain inside until closing, then escort her directly to the Barone estate. Lucia would stay with Rosa and Enzo, far from the diner. Bianca returned to the grill, unaware that Vela's next move had already begun, and it would not come through the diner's doors. The shift ended shortly after 4. Bianca collected her final envelope, said goodbye to the waitresses, and promised the owner she would call when the trouble was over. Outside, a black estate sedan waited at the curb. 1 guard drove while the second sat beside Bianca in the rear. Before leaving, they checked the vehicle, changed the planned route, and reported their departure to Matteo. For the first 20 minutes, nothing followed them. Then, near an industrial stretch of road, blue and red lights appeared in the mirror. A police utility vehicle pulled close and signaled them to stop. The guards checked the plate through their secure radio. It returned as a real Chicago police vehicle reported active that morning. Believing the stop could involve the earlier cloned plate investigation, the driver pulled into a lighted area beside a closed hardware warehouse. 2 uniformed officers approached, 1 on each side. Their badges, jackets, and vehicle all appeared genuine. But the police vehicle had been stolen less than an hour earlier, and its real officers were tied inside an empty garage across town. The first false officer told the driver to step out because the sedan matched a vehicle connected to an armed robbery. The driver kept both hands visible and asked for the officer's district number. The answer came too slowly. At the same moment, the guard beside Bianca noticed that the second man wore his radio on the wrong side and had no body camera. He shouted, "Down!" and pushed Bianca beneath the window line. The false officer drew his weapon. The guard struck his wrist before he could aim, and the shot went into the sedan's roof. The driver opened his door into the other attacker and reached for his own pistol, but a third man appeared from behind the stolen police vehicle. A bullet struck the driver high in the shoulder. He fell against the road, wounded but alive. The rear guard fired once, forcing the attackers back, but another vehicle rushed from the alley and blocked the sedan. 2 more men pulled open the rear door. Bianca fought, kicking one in the knee and holding the seatbelt with both hands, but they dragged her into the waiting van. The entire attack lasted less than 40 seconds. The van sped away while the false officers abandoned the stolen police vehicle and followed in a second car. The rear guard crawled to the wounded driver, pressed cloth against his shoulder, and called Matteo. Both men had survived. The kidnappers had taken Bianca's phone and her envelope of wages, but in their hurry they failed to notice the small dash camera mounted behind the rearview mirror. It had recorded the stolen police vehicle, the attackers' faces, the escape van, and part of its license plate. The footage automatically saved to the sedan's protected memory. At the estate, Enzo was sitting with Lucia in the family room when Matteo received the call. Lucia was showing him how her rabbit could balance on one ear. Matteo's expression told Enzo everything before he spoke. Rosa lifted Lucia into her arms as Enzo rose. 3 years earlier, a telephone call had told him his wife and son were gone. Now another call had come for the mother of the child, who had taught him to speak again. At 7:45, Enzo's private phone rang from a blocked number. Matteo traced the connection while Carlo activated a recorder. Enzo answered on the second ring. The screen showed Salvatore Vella seated in a dark office, wearing a gray suit and the calm expression of a man discussing business over lunch. Behind him, Bianca sat tied to a chair. Her hair had come loose, and fear showed in her eyes, but there was no blood on her face and no visible wound. Vella turned the camera toward her long enough for Enzo to understand that she was alive. Then he stated his price, the coded Barone port ledger, and a signed document surrendering the port contract before midnight. The real ledger contained far more than shipping numbers. It listed private routes, drivers' names, warehouse schedules, trusted companies, and agreements with families that had relied on Enzo for years. Giving it to Vella would save Bianca for one night and place dozens of other people in danger by morning. Vella wanted Lucia brought to the screen. He believed watching the child cry would break Enzo faster than any threat. Enzo refused at first, but Bianca spoke for the first time. "Let me see her, please." Rosa carried Lucia into the study and kept her several feet from the phone. When Lucia saw her mother tied to the chair, she began to ask what had happened. Bianca forced a smile. "Mama is all right. I need you to be brave and stay with Mr. Enzo." Somewhere beyond Bianca's room, a train horn sounded, 2 long blasts followed by a shorter one. Her eyes shifted toward an unseen wall. Then she looked directly into the camera. "Do you remember the loud train beside the red bridge?" she asked Lucia. "Mama can hear it now." Lucia nodded because their bus passed that bridge on the way to the diner. Vella heard only a mother comforting her child. Enzo heard a location hidden inside an ordinary sentence. He gave no sign that he understood. Vella ended the call with a final warning. The ledger and signed contract were to be delivered at 11:30. If Enzo sent police, followed the courier, or brought armed men to the exchange, Bianca would die before midnight. The screen went dark. No one in the study spoke for several seconds. Lucia looked up at Enzo, her rabbit pressed beneath her chin. "You will bring Mama home, won't you?" Enzo lowered himself until they were face to face. He had made promises before and failed to keep them, but he did not look away from her now. "Yes," he said, "I will bring her home." Matteo opened a map of Chicago, while Carlo searched railway schedules and every camera near the escape route. Bianca had given them a bridge, a train, and the sound of its horn, but not enough to identify the building. Midnight was 4 hours away, and Chicago had 3 different red bridges beside railway lines. Enzo's first order was the one everyone expected. He wanted armed teams sent to all 3 red bridges, every nearby warehouse searched, and every road sealed before Vella could move Bianca. Matteo stepped between Enzo and the men waiting at the study door. "If 3 groups arrive at 3 locations, Vella's watchers will see at least one of them," he said. "One telephone call from a lookout, and Bianca dies before we know which building holds her." Enzo's anger turned toward him. Years earlier, no advisor would have dared block his path in such a moment. Matteo did not move. "You told me a man needs something worth protecting," he continued. "Then protect her by thinking, not by proving how many guns you command." The room remained tense until Enzo looked at Lucia sitting beside Rosa. She was hugging her rabbit and watching him for the promise he had just made. Slowly Enzo lowered his hand. "Find the right bridge," he said. The old Enzo would have begun a war. This time, he chose to solve the problem first. Carlo went to the records room and removed a blank copy of the coded port ledger. The real book remained inside a steel safe requiring Enzo's key and Matteo's matching code. Carlo copied the old format, added believable shipment numbers, and used names belonging to closed companies, so the first few pages would survive a quick inspection. He also prepared the withdrawal document Vella had demanded, complete with Enzo's signature copied under supervision. Enzo refused even to consider surrendering the real ledger. It contained the names of ordinary truck drivers, night clerks, mechanics, and warehouse workers who had never chosen to enter a Mafia dispute. It also revealed agreements with families that trusted the Barones to keep their routes private. "If Vella receives that book, Bianca may live tonight," Enzo said, "but innocent people will begin disappearing tomorrow." Carlo understood. The false ledger would buy time, but not much. Vella knew the port business well enough to discover the trick if he studied more than the opening pages. At the same time, investigators recovered the memory card from the damaged escort sedan. The dash camera had captured the ambush from 2 angles. The images showed the stolen police vehicle, the van that carried Bianca away, and 4 digits from its rear plate. A traffic analyst searched city cameras for every van matching that color and number sequence. One appeared 11 minutes after the kidnapping, traveling south beneath an expressway camera. Another image caught it turning west toward the river. That direction removed the northernmost red bridge from the map. 2 possibilities remained, both surrounded by old industrial buildings and railway tracks. Matteo checked the exact time of Vella's video call, 7:46 p.m. He requested freight schedules, but several trains had crossed the South Branch within the same half hour. The evidence had moved them closer, yet not close enough. Then Lucia slipped away from Rosa's chair, approached the map, and pointed at a blue line drawn across the city. "Mama and me go here," she said. Enzo knelt beside her. Lucia could not read street names, but she remembered what she saw from the number 48 bus. She described a wall painted with yellow flowers, a tall red bridge, and a train that always made Bianca cover one of her ears. Carlo found the bus route and placed it over the map. It passed only one of the 2 remaining bridges. Matteo then compared the horn heard during the call, 2 long blasts and 1 short, with the railway timetable. A freight train had crossed that bridge at 7:45, 1 minute before Bianca spoke. No train had passed the other location for nearly an hour. The bridge stood beside an abandoned produce terminal, near the South Branch River. Property records listed the owner as Lakefront Storage Holdings, but Carlo traced the company through 2 false addresses to a restaurant supplier controlled by Salvatore Vella's cousin. Bianca had turned the sound of a train into an address. What Vella dismissed as a mother's comfort had led Enzo to her door. Inside the produce terminal, Bianca sat beneath a hanging lamp in what had once been a loading office. Her wrists were tied behind the chair, and 1 guard remained near the doorway while another carried messages between the office and the main floor. Bianca studied everything she could see: a broken window painted over with black tar, a rusted ventilation pipe behind her, an old fire alarm beside the loading door, and a clock that had stopped at 2:17. She asked the nearest captor whether Vella truly planned to release her after receiving the ledger. The man told her to stop talking. Bianca asked if he had children. His eyes shifted before he answered, and that brief reaction told her he did. She spoke about Lucia, not to beg, but to keep his attention on her face. As he listened despite himself, Bianca pressed the rope around her right wrist against a sharp split in the damaged pipe. Each movement was no wider than a breath. The fibers began to weaken, 1 strand at a time. Back at the estate, Enzo divided the rescue into 2 parts. Carlo would take the false ledger to the exchange point at the river dock at 11:30. He would arrive with only 1 visible driver, while a second vehicle waited several blocks away. Enzo, Matteo, and 6 carefully chosen men would approach the produce terminal from the rear through a service lane hidden from the bridge. They would not enter until Carlo confirmed that Vella or his representatives had appeared at the dock. Before leaving, Enzo returned to the family room. He told Rosa to keep Lucia away from windows and not to open the door for anyone except Carlo. Lucia gave him her stuffed rabbit, saying her mother might need it. Enzo could not carry the toy into a gunfight, so he promised to bring Bianca back to hold it herself. Lucia accepted that promise and kept the rabbit. Enzo also ordered copies of the ransom recording, the dash camera footage, and images of the stolen police vehicle sent through an encrypted account to Detective Helen Ward, a police investigator known for handling organized kidnapping cases without leaking information. The evidence was clear enough to justify arrests. Ward would not know who had sent it, but she would know where the exchange was expected to happen. If Vella escaped Enzo's men, police units would already be moving toward the river. At 11:12, Enzo's team reached the rear boundary of the produce terminal. The building stretched along the river like a dark block of concrete, with broken upper windows and old loading bays facing the tracks. Rain had begun to fall, hiding footsteps beneath its steady beat. Through binoculars, Matteo counted 4 men near the front entrance and 2 on the raised platform above it. No one guarded the narrow service passage at the rear, perhaps because a rusted gate appeared chained shut. One of Enzo's men cut the chain without letting it strike the ground. Carlo's voice came through Enzo's earpiece from the exchange point. He was in position with the false ledger. A black car had arrived, but Vella had not stepped out. Enzo checked his watch. 38 minutes remained before midnight. Somewhere inside the terminal, Bianca continued working the rope against the pipe, while the old fire alarm waited within reach of one freed hand. Enzo and Matteo entered the rear passage with 3 men behind them, while the others held the exit. The corridor smelled of wet wood, rust, and spoiled grain left from another decade. A weak row of ceiling bulbs led toward the center of the building. Then every bulb went dark at once. Enzo had not ordered the power cut. Matteo raised a closed fist, stopping the team. Ahead of them, boots moved across the concrete, and someone shouted that the prisoner was being prepared for transfer. The darkness meant Vela's men were changing their plan before the ledger exchange had even begun. Enzo moved forward by touch, one hand against the wall and the other around his weapon. From deeper inside the terminal came the scrape of a metal door, a frightened voice, and then a single gunshot. The sound struck the corridor and rolled back through the dark. Enzo could not tell whether the shot had come from Bianca's room. The gunshot had not struck Bianca. When the terminal lost power, one of her captors heard a metal loading door shift in the wind and fired toward the sound. The bullet buried itself in a wooden crate across the main floor. In the office, Bianca flinched but continued rubbing the weakened rope against the split pipe. Outside her door, the guard cursed the darkness and moved into the corridor to find out who had fired. That gave Bianca the moment she needed. The final strands around her right wrist began to separate. Elsewhere in the building, Enzo held his team against the wall until the echo died. No cry followed the shot. No one shouted that the prisoner had been hit. It was not proof that Bianca was safe, but it was enough to keep him moving. Matteo pointed toward a faint green exit sign running on backup power. The sign revealed a narrow storage corridor leading toward the loading offices. Enzo entered first, unaware that Bianca was now only one pull away from freeing her hand. At the river dock, Carlo stood beside the open case containing the false ledger. 2 of Vela's men searched him while a third checked the car. Salvatore Vela remained inside the black vehicle, watching through a half-lowered window. Carlo lifted the ledger slowly and opened it to the first coded page. "You wanted the book. Here it is." One of Vela's men compared the opening entries with a list on his phone. The first numbers matched because Carlo had copied old Barone records exactly. He turned another page, then another, taking far longer than Carlo wanted. Carlo kept him talking, explaining that the withdrawal document would become valid only after Vela signed the receiving copy. It was a legal detail invented to gain minutes, but Vela's pride made him listen. While they argued, Carlo touched the button inside his coat that signaled Enzo. The exchange had begun. Yet the false ledger contained one flaw that a careful enemy would eventually recognize. Inside the terminal, Bianca pulled hard and freed her right hand. The rope burned her skin, but she did not stop. The guard returned to the doorway, forcing her to hide the loose wrist behind the chair. He ordered her to stand because Vela might move her before midnight. Bianca said she could not stand while her other hand remained tied. When he turned to call for help, she reached behind her, gripped the rusted ventilation pipe, and pulled. A short section came loose with a dull crack. The guard spun around. Bianca swung the pipe into his wrist as he reached for his weapon. The gun struck the floor and slid beneath a cabinet. Before he could recover, Bianca ran to the old fire alarm and pulled the handle. A bell exploded through the terminal. Red emergency lights began flashing from backup batteries, and the sprinkler system opened above the storage floor. Water poured through the building, turning every moving figure into a dark shape beneath the lights. The alarm gave Enzo what the darkness had taken away. A gunman appeared at the end of the corridor, outlined by the red flashes. Matteo pushed Enzo behind a concrete pillar and fired toward the floor near the man's feet, forcing him back. A second attacker came through a side door and aimed at Enzo. Matteo stepped between them. The bullet cut across the outside of his upper arm, tearing cloth and skin without striking bone. He dropped to one knee but kept his weapon raised until one of Enzo's men disarmed the attacker. "It is a graze," Matteo said before Enzo could ask. "Go." Enzo followed the ringing alarm toward the loading office. He found Bianca holding the metal pipe while her captor struggled to reach the gun beneath the cabinet. Enzo crossed the room, pulled the man away, and ordered him onto the floor. Bianca stared at Enzo as if she had not fully believed he would reach her. "Lucia?" she asked. "Safe," he answered. "Waiting for you." Enzo cut the remaining rope and placed his coat around Bianca's shoulders. He wanted to take her outside himself, but more gunfire sounded from the main floor. Matteo was wounded, and Vela's men still controlled the front entrance. Enzo chose 2 guards he trusted and ordered them to lead Bianca through the rear passage to a waiting vehicle. Bianca resisted for one moment, unwilling to leave him and Matteo behind. Enzo told her that Lucia had given him a promise to keep. That was enough. She went with the guards, stepping through ankle-deep water while emergency bells rang behind her. Enzo returned to Matteo, wrapped a bandage around his arm, and helped clear the last corridor. Several captors surrendered when they realized both exits were blocked. Others fled toward the river, where police sirens were already growing louder. The rescue inside the terminal had succeeded, but at the dock the false ledger was running out of time. Vella finally stepped from his car and took the book himself. He examined a code on the 4th page, then looked at Carlo. The number belonged to a storage contract that had closed 2 years earlier. Carlo saw recognition enter Vella's face. "This is false." Vella threw the ledger onto the wet pavement and ordered his driver toward the terminal. He believed Bianca was still inside and intended to use her one last time. Carlo's second vehicle moved to follow, but Vella's men fired at its tires and blocked the dock road. Vella's car sped toward the red bridge with the ransom phone, Bianca's stolen phone, and keys taken from the stolen police vehicle. Halfway across, police units appeared from both directions. Detective Helen Ward had received the evidence, confirmed the stolen vehicle report, and placed teams near the exchange route. Vella's driver struck the brakes, trapped between police cars. Vella abandoned the vehicle and ran toward the pedestrian path. He did not reach the far side. Officers brought him down near the center of the bridge and recovered both phones, the police keys, the ransom recording, and the false withdrawal document. Anton Greco, the temporary wine server, was captured minutes later while trying to leave the produce terminal through a river gate. Faced with the photographs, payment records, and Vella's arrest, Greco admitted using a dead man's identity to enter the Barone estate. He confirmed that he had photographed Lucia and sent the image to Vella. The 2 guards wounded during Bianca's kidnapping were taken to the hospital. The driver's shoulder injury required surgery, but doctors said he would recover. Matteo received stitches and refused to stay in a hospital bed. By 3 in the morning, Detective Ward had enough evidence to hold Vella on kidnapping, extortion, assault, and impersonating police officers. For the first time since the photograph was taken, Bianca and Lucia were no longer being hunted. Bianca returned to the estate shortly before sunrise. Rosa was waiting in the entrance hall, with Lucia asleep against her shoulder and the stuffed rabbit tucked beneath the child's arm. When the front doors opened, Lucia woke, saw her mother, and struggled down before Rosa could stop her. She ran across the marble floor. Bianca dropped to her knees and caught her, burying her face in Lucia's hair, while the child held on with both arms. Enzo remained near the doorway. He had brought Bianca home, but this moment belonged to mother and daughter. Bianca lifted her eyes over Lucia's shoulder and met his gaze. No words could hold the fear of the past hours, so she only nodded. Enzo returned the gesture. He did not step forward or ask to be thanked. Seeing Lucia's arms around her mother was enough. Rosa began to cry openly, and even Carlo turned away to give them privacy. The house had spent weeks watching Lucia bring Enzo back to life. Now Enzo had returned the one person without whom Lucia's life would have broken. Carlo placed a hand on his shoulder. Matteo, pale beneath the bandage on his arm, watched from a chair. Later, after Bianca had been examined and Lucia had refused to leave her side, the child crossed the family room and took Enzo's hand. She led him toward the upstairs corridor, stopped beneath the faded wooden letters on the nursery door, and asked, "Mr. Enzo, who was the little boy in the locked room?" Lucia's question remained in the upstairs corridor after she had spoken it. Enzo looked at the faded letters, spelling Luca's name, then down at the child holding his hand. He could have given her a simple answer, but the truth belonged to more than Lucia. "Come downstairs with me," he said. In the family room, Rosa sat beside Bianca, while Carlo helped Matteo settle into a chair without pulling the stitches in his arm. Enzo asked them all to stay. Lucia climbed onto the sofa beside her mother, her rabbit held across her knees. No guards, servants, or advisors were invited. For the first time since the accident, Enzo chose to speak before anyone asked him to. He stood near the cold fireplace, removed the nursery key from his pocket, and placed it on the table. "The little boy was my son," he told Lucia. "His name was Luca." Then he looked at his mother, his brother, and the people who had risked their lives that night. "There is something about his death I have never told any of you. 3 years earlier, The family had eaten Sunday dinner at Rosa's house, while freezing rain covered the roads. Elena had watched ice gather on the windows and asked Enzo to remain there until morning. Luca was already asleep in a portable crib upstairs. Rosa had prepared the guest room. Carlo had offered to drive behind them if Enzo insisted on leaving. Enzo refused every suggestion. His car was armored, fitted with reinforced doors, heavy tires, and safety glass. He had spent years believing enough money and preparation could make danger obey him. He told Elena the vehicle was safer than most houses and promised they would be home within 30 minutes. She disagreed, and he became impatient. As they carried Luca to the car, Elena tried once more to continue the conversation. Enzo opened the driver's door and said, "We will talk when we get home." Those were the final words he ever spoke to his wife. They never reached home. On a curved section of road above the river, a delivery truck came toward them too fast. Its rear wheels lost their grip on black ice, and the truck crossed the center line. Enzo turned the wheel, but there was nowhere to go. The impact struck the passenger side, crushing Elena's door and the rear section where Luca's child seat had been secured. Enzo's reinforced driver side frame held. He remembered the airbag, the sound of metal folding, and Elena calling Luca's name once. He tried to reach them, but his door was jammed and smoke filled the car. Passing drivers pulled Enzo out through the broken windshield before the fuel caught fire. Emergency crews arrived within minutes, yet Elena and Luca died before they could be freed. The investigation blamed black ice and the truck's speed. No charge was brought against Enzo. Everyone called him fortunate to be alive. He heard only that the armor he trusted had saved him while failing the two people he loved. Enzo stopped and looked toward the dining room. Every Sunday, I saw the chair where Elena should have been. I heard the conversation we never finished. I thought if I spoke, I would have to admit that I chose that road. Rosa crossed the room and took her son's hand. She had waited 3 years to hear the burden he had carried. Leaving that night was a mistake, she said, but surviving was not a betrayal. Elena did not die because you lived. Carlo admitted that he had blamed himself for not taking the keys away, and Rosa confessed that she had wondered whether she should have hidden them. The accident had imprisoned each of them in a different question. Bianca listened before speaking. Luca deserves to be remembered because he was loved, she said, not because his father keeps punishing himself. If pain is the only thing you keep, Lucia will grow up believing love always ends in a locked room. Her words did not erase Enzo's guilt, but they showed him what that guilt had begun to cost. Lucia slid from the sofa and held out her hand. "Can we say hello to Luca's room?" she asked. Enzo picked up the brass key. Together they walked upstairs, followed by Bianca, Rosa, Carlo, and Matteo. The lock resisted before turning with a hard click. Enzo opened the nursery door for the first time in 3 years. Dust lay across a blue rocking chair and a low child's bookcase. A wooden cradle stood near the curtained window. Luca's clothes remained folded inside a small wardrobe, and a toy chest rested beneath painted stars on the wall. Elena's photograph stood beside a memory box containing Luca's hospital bracelet, first shoes, a lock of hair, and the silver spoon Rosa had given him at birth. Enzo entered alone for several seconds. He touched the cradle, then opened the curtains. Morning light crossed the room. Rosa stopped at the threshold and pressed her fingers to her lips. Carlo rested a hand on the doorframe, unable to enter. Matteo lowered his head. Even Lucia understood that the room belonged first to the family who had lost someone, so she waited beside Bianca until Enzo turned and invited them inside. Nothing inside vanished. Nothing was replaced. The room simply stopped being a tomb. Enzo kept the cradle, Elena's photographs, Luca's clothes, and the personal memory box exactly where they were. He asked Bianca whether Lucia could use the rocking chair, bookcase, small wardrobe, and toy chest. Bianca hesitated, afraid accepting them might turn Lucia into a substitute for the child Enzo had lost. Enzo understood. "They are not Luca," he said, looking at her and then at Lucia. "And Lucia is not here to replace him. I would rather see these things used with care than watch them disappear beneath dust." Bianca accepted only the age-appropriate pieces. Lucia placed her rabbit inside the toy chest for one moment, then took it back and promised she would keep the books clean. Enzo also chose an unused room near the kitchen to become a safe childcare room for every household worker. It would have proper supervision, emergency contacts, toys, beds, and windows facing the inner courtyard. No employee would again have to hide a child or choose between wages and safety. Opening the nursery was not the only decision Enzo had delayed. That afternoon he met Bianca in the study with Rosa and Matteo present. He placed 6 months of kitchen reports and staff schedules before her. Her name appeared beside nearly every solved problem. She had trained workers, protected them from unfair blame, managed failed deliveries, arranged safe rides, and kept the household functioning when senior employees panicked. Enzo offered her a new position as head of household operations, responsible for coordinating the kitchen, schedules, supplies, and staff welfare. The existing department supervisors would keep their roles, but Bianca would have the authority and salary her work deserved. He made it clear that the offer was not payment for Lucia's affection, and not a reward for being kidnapped. It was recognition of work Bianca had already performed without title or proper pay. Since she had resigned from the diner, the salary would also mean she would never need to search for another second job. Bianca did not accept immediately. She asked for written schedules, paid leave, safe transport after late shifts, and a private way for workers to report mistreatment without going through the supervisor involved. She also asked that the childcare room serve every employee, not only her daughter. Enzo agreed to each condition and instructed Matteo to put them into a signed policy before the end of the week. Bianca accepted the position. Rosa embraced her, while Lucia announced that her mother was now the boss of dinner. Even Matteo smiled. As the meeting ended, Enzo looked toward the long dining room that had held 3 years of painful Sundays. "Come back next week," he said to Rosa and Carlo. Then he looked at Bianca, Lucia, and Matteo. "All of you, Sunday dinner, at the same table." No one answered at first because they understood what he had offered. It was the first family invitation Enzo Barone had given in 3 years, and the next Sunday would reveal whether he was truly ready to return to his own table. The first Sunday dinner after Enzo opened the nursery was not grand. Rosa brought Elena's lemon cake, Carlo arrived with his wife and sons, and Matteo came with his injured arm supported in a sling. Bianca sat at the table rather than serving it, though she rose twice from habit before Rosa gently pulled her back into her chair. Lucia brought her stuffed rabbit and placed it beside her plate. Enzo spoke more during that one meal than he had during all the Sunday dinners of the previous 3 years. No one celebrated the change aloud. They simply answered him, passed the bread, and allowed the conversation to grow at its own pace. One dinner became another. By the time several weeks had passed, the long table no longer felt like a place where everyone waited for Enzo's grief to enter the room. Yet the greatest change was not measured by the number of words he spoke. It was measured by how little anyone feared the next silence. Outside the estate, the case against Salvatore Vella continued to grow. Prosecutors charged him with kidnapping, extortion, assault, conspiracy, and impersonating police officers. The ransom recording connected his voice to the demand for the port ledger. Bianca's stolen phone, the keys from the stolen police vehicle, and the false withdrawal document had all been recovered from his car. Anton Greco, the temporary wine server, remained in custody and gave a full statement describing how he entered the estate under a dead man's identity, took the photograph, and sent it to Vella. The men who